Hello. Are you ever frightened of the dark? You shouldn't be, because really everything's exactly the same in the dark as it is in the light. And anyway, all you have to do is to switch on the electric light. But on board Mr. Noah's Ark, Mr. Noah didn't have any electric light because it was all such a long, long time ago. He used candles like this one. When you've finished with a candle, you blow it out very carefully. You always have to be rather careful with candles. Now today, my story is about something which happened on board the Ark, in the dark, in the middle of the night. Something so strange that all the animals were absolutely terrified. Even the monkeys were frightened. Have you ever seen a frightened monkey? Let's see if I can draw one. Monkeys are a little bit like us. They have ears rather like us, very, very big mouths, and rather little eyes, rather frightened eyes, because this monkey is really frightened. He's running away, running as fast as he can, and he's running away from something which you're going to hear about in this story, which is called The Haunted Ark. One day, Mr. Noah put up a "Do Not Disturb" notice outside his cabin to show that he was busy. As a matter of fact, Japhett and Janet and Crockle and Ham and Mrs. Ham were pretty busy too. And so were Mr. and Mrs. Shem. As usual, they were checking the food stores. They checked the stores every day, and they did it very carefully.
"How many potatoes, Mrs. Shem?"
Asked Shem. 6,425, she counted.
"But there ought to be 6,430.
Cried Shem.
There are 5 potatoes missing."
That's not all, Shem, said his wife. There were 4 onions missing yesterday, and 6 whole broad beans the day before.
"You realize what this means?"
Said Shem.
"It means that one of the animals is stealing food. We must send for the children. Because,"
he added darkly,
"I expect it's that baby crocodile of theirs."
Now, Crockle shouldn't have been on the Ark at all, because there were already 2 perfectly good, or bad, crocodiles on board. But the children knew that he wasn't a thief. When they arrived, they said so to Shem.
"In that case, I shall have to question all the animals,"
replied Shem severely.
"Call them together into the center of the Ark. I must get to the bottom of this."
Just then, Ham came along. "It seems a lot of trouble over 5 potatoes," he said. "Have you told Mr. Noah?"
"He's busy,"
said Shem, pointing to the "Do Not Disturb" notice on his father's door.
"Don't worry, I can handle this."
Meanwhile, the children were collecting all the animals. When they were all there, Shem told them what had happened.
"This is a very serious matter,"
He said.
"If the guilty animal doesn't own up, there will be no more sugar lumps on Sunday."
And he looked hard at Crockle. The animals were very shocked. They loved their Sunday sugar lumps. Some looked suspicious, and some looked innocent. The crocodiles looked almost too good to be true, and all the animals turned to look at Crockle. But no one came forward to own up.
"That's it then.
Announced Shem.
No more sugar lumps until we find the thief."
The children looked at each other in dismay. "This is bad," said Janet. "We must find out who did it." "I know what," said Japhett. "Let's guard the food store tonight. Maybe the thief will come back. If he does, we'll catch him red-handed." "Or red-pawed," said Janet. So that night, Japhett and Janet and Crockle crept down to the food store. There was a light under Mr. Noah's door, but everyone else was fast asleep. When they got to the food store, it was very dark indeed, and there were long black shadows everywhere. "It's very creepy down here," said Janet. "Do you believe in ghosts?" "Of course not," replied Japheth. "I feel more sleepy than creepy." Just then there was a loud noise right next to them. Both children jumped, and Japheth almost dropped his candle. Then they saw what had happened. Crockle had been sniffing round the store, and somehow he had managed to tip over a barrel of apples and then fall headfirst into an open flour bin. When they lifted him out of the bin, both children burst out laughing. "You do look funny, Crockle," said Japheth. Then Janet said, "Let's make a booby trap for the thief. We'll balance a sack of flour on top of the door. If any animal comes in, the sack will fall on him and cover him with white. Then, even if he gets away, we'll be able to tell which animal it is." "That's a super idea," said Japheth. So they balanced a big sack of flour on top of the door and left it a little bit open. Just as they finished, they heard a sound outside. It was Shem. He had been woken by the noise Crockle had made and thought the thief was in the food store. So now he was on his way down to catch him. But of course the children couldn't see who it was. "Quick, blow out the candle," whispered Japheth. "There's someone on the stairs." "Oh," thought Shem as he pushed open the door. "Someone's going to get a surprise." And someone did. It was Shem, because the children's booby trap worked very well. "Help!" he yelled. "Help! Robbers! Fire! Murder!" He ran for his life back up the stairs with the flour sack still over his head. "Oh dear," said Janet. "That sounded like your big brother Shem." "And that means trouble," answered Japheth. "We'd better go after him." But they were too late to catch poor Shem. He couldn't see where he was going, but that didn't stop him. He was still shouting when he dashed into the animals' quarters. They all woke up with a start, took one look at the ghostly white figure of Shem, and bolted. The noise of the animals stampeding roused Mr. and Mrs. Ham, and when they saw what was happening, they leapt out of bed and ran for their lives. "Help!" they shouted. Then Mrs. Shem woke up. She saw her brother and sister-in-law running towards her with all the animals behind them. In a flash, she was out of bed too, and away. "Help! Help!" cried Mrs. Shem. So now, Mrs. Shem and Mr. and Mrs. Ham and all the animals were on the run. Out of one door and onto the deck they ran, with the ghostly white figure of Shem chasing them, and Japheth and Janet and Crockle chasing Shem. Round and round the deck they all rushed, howling and growling, roaring, barking and shouting, and inside again and up the stairs to Mr. Noah's cabin. "What on earth's going on?" cried Mr. Noah. "Why are you covered in flour, Shem? Take that ridiculous sack off your head at once." But then Mrs. Noah said more kindly, "Now calm down, everybody, and tell us what happened." Then the children told them all about guarding the food store and Crockle and the booby trap. "But what were you trying to catch?" asked Mr. Noah. And then Shem told them all very sternly about the 5 missing potatoes and the 4 missing onions and the 6 missing broad beans. Mr. and Mrs. Noah both roared with laughter. "If only you told us," said Mrs. Noah. "It was I who took the potatoes and the onions and the beans to plant them so that they would grow more." "It was all my fault," said Mr. Noah. "I shouldn't have put up that 'Don't Disturb' notice. But you do look just like a ghost, Shem. No wonder the poor animals were frightened. Let's give them all an extra sugar lump now." "Let's start with Crockle," said Japheth. "He still looks a bit like a ghost himself." Well, that's the end of The Haunted Ark. It takes a lot to frighten Crockle, but he does get in the way sometimes, and I'll tell you about that next week. Until then, goodbye.